When a Halloween display hides a real arm beneath its fake graves, Detective Bennett Crowe is called in to uncover the truth. What begins as one discovery grows into a chilling pattern of bodies buried beneath perfect gardens and a killer who believes murder is just another form of cultivation. The Garden of the Dead, a story by 10 Chapters Studio. Chapter 1. The Arm in the Garden. The scream came just before dusk, cutting through the chorus of children rehearsing trick-or-treat routes and the hum of leaf blowers. On Maple Hollow Crescent, people assumed at first it was part of the show, someone testing a haunted house recording, maybe. Then the sound broke again, sharp and human, and every porch light flicked on. By the time the first patrol car arrived, the street had gone silent, except for the hiss of a fog machine. In front of number 14 stood a woman in gardening gloves, shaking. At her feet, a golden retriever pawed excitedly at the loose dirt of a flower bed. The R.I.P. stake had toppled sideways, half buried in soil, now darkened with something red. Sergeant O'Leary crouched beside the bed, tugged at what looked like a rubber Halloween prop, and froze when it bent the wrong way. "Get the neighbors back inside," he muttered, and someone did. The medical examiner wouldn't get there for another hour. Until then, the arm stayed half buried under plastic bones and decorative cobwebs, real blood seeping into fake. Bennett Crowe arrived the next morning, long after the news trucks had retreated. He didn't usually take fresh cases. His work came from the cold, files that had gone quiet, bodies long since catalogued. But this one touched an older nerve. The file that had landed on his desk an hour earlier was thin but familiar. Soil composition, shallow depth, a cut wrist bound with a plastic zip tie. That last detail was the echo, his echo. 10 years ago, on the other side of the city, he'd found a similar wrist under a collapsed greenhouse wall. Same pattern, same type of tie. The case had gone nowhere. The suspect, a waste contractor, had died before questioning, but Bennett had never liked coincidences. He stepped out of the car and scanned the row of identical houses. Maple Hollow looked too polished to be interesting. Yet even in perfection, disorder whispered if you knew where to listen. He saw it immediately. Number 14's garden, tidier than its neighbors. The crime scene disturbance had been repaired overnight by someone eager to restore symmetry. The soil was tamped too flat, the mulch sprinkled like frosting. No police gardener would do that. He knocked. A middle-aged woman opened the door, face pale but composed. "You're with the police?" "Consultant," Bennett said. "They asked me to look at your garden." Her eyes darted past him toward the curb, where reporters had begun to gather again. "They already took everything." "I'm sure they did. I'm not looking for what they found." He walked to the flower bed, crouching carefully. The woman hovered behind him, twisting her hands in her sleeves. "I told them I thought it was a prank. My husband said the arm looked too real. Daisy kept digging and—" "Did she dig often?" "Only there. She's never done that before." He looked closer. The bed's edge was sharply defined, the soil recently turned along the full length, not just at the dog's hole. The mix was lighter than typical loam. Someone had blended it with perlite and something chalky. He rubbed a pinch between his fingers. "Bone meal," he murmured. Her blinks blinked. Is that bad? For roses, it's excellent. For covering decomposition, it's traditional. Her knees gave slightly. He think whoever did this knows their gardening. He straightened slowly. Was your landscaping done recently? Yes, the HOA hires a contractor every fall. Same man for years, Mr. Finch. He lives 3 doors down. Bennett glanced toward number 8, where a man in a canvas vest was arranging cornstalks around his porch steps. Late 50s, silver hair, precise movements. Every motion measured. When he finished, he stepped back, aligned the display with the doorframe, and brushed invisible dust from his hands. The kind of man who couldn't stand a crooked nail. He knew the type. The body was officially unidentified, but preliminary notes said male, mid-40s, partial remains, dismembered post-mortem. No ID yet. The media had already dubbed it the Halloween garden murder. Bennett disliked names like that. They made people treat death like theater. He walked the street once more before leaving, tracing the line of gardens down the crescent. Same soil texture repeated in 2 more yards, faintly paler, fine-grained, as though sifted. To anyone else, it looked like good maintenance. To him, it looked like pattern. A neighbor waved cheerfully from across the road, oblivious. Behind her, another R.I.P. stake gleamed in the morning light, freshly painted. Bennett's hand tightened around the file in his pocket. Patterns always started with one arm. The rest followed if you looked hard enough. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. The Hollow Neighbors. By mid-morning, Maple Hollow Crescent looked like a stage being reset between acts. Yellow tape gone, decorations half-stripped, a single police cruiser idling by the parquet. The neighbors, freed from fear by daylight, had begun pruning, sweeping, pretending normal had returned. Bennett knew the choreography. Guilt always hid behind activity. He carried a paper coffee from the corner cafe and moved slowly down the sidewalk, watching who looked away first. Most did. One didn't. At number 8, Harold Finch knelt beside a bed of ornamental kale, pruning shears flashing in tight, exact snips. His vest was spotless, not even a dusting of soil on his cuffs. The porch behind him was a symmetrical masterpiece. 2 pumpkins of identical size, a centered corn arch, a discreet Happy Hauntings banner aligned like a level line. "Mr. Finch?" Bennett asked. He straightened, wiping the blades with a cloth. "That's right. You're the consultant the police mentioned. They said you supervise the street's landscaping?" "Volunteer position. It keeps me busy. Maple Hollow takes pride in its presentation." Bennett looked past him at the lawn, edges crisp as ruled paper. "I can see that." Finch's eyes followed the compliment, cautious. "Terrible business at number 14. Poor Miller family. I helped plant that bed last week." "You supply the soil?" "Partially. I mix my own blend. Peat, perlite, crushed eggshells. Roses love calcium." "And bone meal?" "Old gardener's trick. Organic, environmentally sound. My father used it." "Where was your father a gardener?" "Municipal Parks Department, before privatization." That detail hummed faintly against Bennett's memory. His unsolved case a decade earlier had involved a municipal parks disposal site. Coincidence again, or echo? He crouched beside the bed, examining the soil line. "The police will want to sample this." "Of course, I've nothing to hide." He said it smoothly, maybe too smoothly, as though rehearsed. Then he added, "I heard they found only part of the man. Awful, isn't it?" Bennett didn't ask how he knew that. The detail had not been released. Across the street, a woman in yoga gear hovered by her mailbox. Bennett crossed over. "Morning, ma'am. You live opposite Mr. Finch?" Yes, Taryn Nguyen. I run the neighborhood Facebook group. Everyone's scared to post anything, so they text me instead. Good. Maybe you can help me understand your block. She laughed nervously. We're boring. Except Harold. He's particular. He measures people's hedges, literally. If your boxwood exceeds code, he trims it himself. Says he's protecting property value. Bennett nodded toward Finch's house. Does he do that at night? Her expression faltered. Sometimes. I've seen him with a headlamp checking sprinkler lines. He hums when he works. Old song. My husband calls him the caretaker. Ever see him near number 14? Everyone was there last week. We set up decorations together. Harold brought extra soil, said he'd top up the beds before the cold snap. There it was. Opportunity wrapped in civic helpfulness. Bennett spent the next hour walking the cul-de-sac, notebook tucked in his coat. He logged soil colors, moisture, mulch patterns. 2 houses, 14 and 10, shared the same pale gray perlite mix. 10 was Finch's. No coincidence now. He stopped at a storm drain where a faint white residue streaked the grate. He touched it, rubbed thumb to forefinger. Bone dust, almost certainly, mixed with peat. Behind him a voice said, "Beautiful day for it." Finch again, appearing without sound. Bennett straightened. For what? For investigation. Finch smiled faintly. You'll find Maple Hollow very cooperative. We've nothing to hide here. Bennett studied him. People who say that usually do. Finch's smile held. You're limping. Old injury. Gardening accident? Something like that. A flicker of curiosity crossed Finch's face, but he didn't press. If you'd like soil samples, I keep extra blend in my shed. I'll take a look. He led Bennett through a gate into a backyard that smelled of cedar oil and fertilizer. Everything was labeled. Rose varieties on brass tags, tool hooks numbered. The shed interior was museum neat. Bags of peat and perlite stacked by size, mason jars of crushed shells arranged alphabetically by source farm. Organization helps the mind, Finch said quietly. I find disorder more revealing, Bennett answered. Finch tilted his head, amused. Then you'll love this case. He turned away, leaving Bennett's gaze on the floor, where faint scrape marks circled the freezer chest in the corner, as though it had been dragged recently. A thin water ring glistened beneath. Power outage last month? Bennett asked. Briefly. Lost a few cuts of venison. A shame. Venison? Yes, from a hunting trip years ago. Keeps well if sealed right. Bennett noted the plural years. Few people stock venison from years ago. When he returned to his car, he phoned Sergeant O'Leary. Run a background on Harold Finch, Maple Hollow Crescent, House 10. Focus on any previous residences near municipal parks or landscaping contracts. What's the connection? O'Leary asked. His soil has memory, and it's starting to repeat itself. He hung up and watched through the windshield as Finch knelt again among his perfect beds, aligning a small wooden sign that read, Rest in Peace. The letters gleamed fresh, paint still wet. Bennett wondered how many times the man had written those words with his own hand, and whether the paint was the only thing that hadn't yet dried. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. The Pattern Beneath. The lab occupied half a floor of glass and concrete, trying not to look bureaucratic. Bennett liked the ceilings. exposed conduit, no pretense. A young tech arranged petri dishes before him like a deck of cards. 4 samples, 14A, 14B, 10A, and control from the parket. She slid a report across. 14 and 10 match, peat, perlite, and a calcium phosphate spike from bone meal. The parket is clean. Bone meal age? Fresh, not months. Collagen traces suggest it was ground by hand, homebrew. Bennett pictured Finch's shed, the jars, and the water ring beneath the freezer. Homebrew makes sense. The ME entered, still gloved. Crowe, we matched the zip tie. Manufacturer, common brand, but your pattern holds. Double-tightened, bias cut at 30 degrees. The arm has a narrow spade nick on the bone. Your killer is a gardener. Cause of death? Strangulation, ligature unknown. Forearm shows ice crystal damage from a freezer. Bennett thought of Finch's word venison. Thank you. The ME paused. We're cleaning a faint tattoo near the wrist. It might help you. Before he could ask, his phone buzzed. O'Leary. We've got a missing persons hit. Dan Mercer, 44, handyman. Worked Maple Hollow 3 weeks ago. Guess which address? 10. Right. Finch says Mercer canceled a sprinkler repair. His phone was found dead in his truck. Canine unit is heading to the Crescent. Keep it quiet. Tell neighbors we're checking for animal remains. They'll talk more freely. You're charming, O'Leary said. I'm efficient. Bennett hung up, staring at the calcium spike on the graph. People always left fingerprints. In dirt, in words, in order. Maple Hollow was busier now. Parents pretended to count pumpkins while watching the police van. Finch stood on his porch, arms folded, face composed, the perfectionist in his natural habitat. The handler began with the parquet, neutral scent, then moved to 14. A low whine, then a sit. Flag. Shifted right. Another sit. Another flag. Across the street, the second dog circled number 12, then laid down, head on paws. Alert, the handler said. A little girl tugged her mother's hand. Did it find treasure? Her mother smiled weakly. Maybe. At 10, the dog paused, confused, then sat beneath Finch's cornstalk arch. Finch descended 1 step. Is this really necessary? You're upsetting the community and about to ruin a season's work. It's necessary, Bennett said. There's nothing unusual here except dedication. Dedication leaves patterns, Finch's eyes narrowed. What patterns? Straight lines. Bennett stepped to the edge of the flower bed, pretending to admire the chrysanthemums, and sighted down the street. The flags at 14 and 12 and the dog's sit at 10 formed a perfect vector pointing north. Finch's gaze flicked the same way. Coincidence, he said. Maybe. The world loves them. O'Leary arrived as the GPR unit rolled into place. The screen chirped, mapping density. 20 centimeters, uniform, 35, anomaly, 40, void. Void? Air pocket or burlap. Root ball, Finn suggested. The tech didn't answer. Bennett crossed to 12. The mulch was too fresh, the color too even. Beneath it, chalky grit dusted his fingertips. Same blend. He looked up. Finch had turned away, studying his railing. O'Leary's radio cracked. Crowe, the tattoo cleaned up, a spade symbol near the wrist. Mercer's got the same one in a Facebook photo. Copy, Bennett said, pocketing his phone. A spade on the victim's wrist, a spade in Finch's shed. Patterns again. Sergeant, the handler called. Second alert at 12's rear bed. The elderly homeowner shook his head. We know, Bennett said gently. Neighbors gathered as tarps went down. The first shovel broke earth, the second deepened, and the third changed tone. Burlap, the tech said. A small parcel came up, heavy for its size. The ME's assistant opened a corner, then shut it again. forearm, left. The little girl whispered, "Is that still treasure?" "No," her mother said quietly. "It's something someone lost." Finch's porch light clicked on, though the sun was still up. Automatic timers, Bennett thought, or habit. He looked again along the north line. 3 yards connected in silent symmetry. Patterns weren't magic. They were compulsion, the need to repeat what worked. He raised a hand toward O'Leary. "Next site's across the street, 2 houses down." O'Leary frowned. "How do you know?" "Because he likes symmetry. He wants us to keep looking, but never finish." The handler nodded and released the dog. It trotted ahead, nose low, tail a steady metronome, then sat exactly where Bennett pointed. On his porch, Finch began to hum, a short, tuneless phrase, just enough to mark the beat. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. Ghosts in the Soil. By evening, the cul-de-sac looked like a film set under reconstruction. Half-dug lawns, tarps over hedges, camera lights painting the air pale. The neighborhood association had tried to post a statement about safety and community resilience, but no one was scrolling. Everyone was standing behind curtains. Bennett leaned against the hood of the cruiser, watching crime scene techs grid the beds. His coffee had gone cold 2 hours ago, but he still held it. Habit gave the hands something to do. O'Leary walked over, fatigue creasing his uniform. "They found a torso," the sergeant said quietly, "in the bed across from Finch's, wrapped in burlap, same pattern as the arms. No head yet." Bennett nodded once. "Torsos are practical. They don't roll." "You're always this cheerful?" "Only on holidays." O'Leary half snorted. "You think he's done this before?" "I think he learned from doing it before." Bennett watched the teams move. Same soil, same wrapping, same spacing. That's practice, not panic. The techs had started calling the connecting strip between gardens the North Line. Bennett didn't correct them. The name fit. Every grave had been aligned to it, like someone marking latitude. He spent the next morning at the forensic lab again. The freezer fragments had yielded trace DNA on the plastic bag corners, same donor as the arm and torso. The prints on the zip tie were partial, but clean enough to belong to Dan Mercer, not his killer, his own. And there was something else. Fragments of venison tissue inside the same bags, or what appeared to be. On closer analysis, the venison matched human mitochondrial sequences. The label on Finch's garage freezer had been literal camouflage. When Bennett returned to Maple Hollow, the October sky had turned pewter. Reporters had been pushed back 2 blocks. Residents were signing up for trauma counseling and soil testing. Finch stood on his lawn like a curator in front of a vandalized exhibit. His shirt was crisp, his shoes unscuffed, but the small twitch at his jaw betrayed him. "You're back early," he said. "I never left." Bennett held up a file. "You signed HOA work orders for Mercer. The last one dated October 27th. Says he was scheduled to replace sprinkler heads for you. He never came. His phone pinged off your Wi-Fi that night at 9:12 p.m. Finch's eyes narrowed. He must have used the signal outside. You keep your network locked. Finch stopped, recalibrated the smile. "I might have given him the password for updates. Everyone does these days." Do they also give their passwords to the people they murder? The smile faded. That's a strong accusation for a man who deals in maybes. I deal in patterns, and yours are tidy enough to trace in daylight. Finch tilted his head, studying him. You think I killed that drifter because I dislike untidiness? I think you killed him because you enjoyed the symmetry afterward, the same way you realigned the corn arch twice during questioning. You like things to end where they began. Finch's jaw flexed. You sound like a psychologist. I used to be. A flicker. Barely a beat, but Bennett caught it. The micro-tightening around the eyes when someone hears something that fits too closely. That night, rain came hard. The police tents sagged. Puddles filled the excavations. Bennett stayed in his car, watching wipers drag water in rhythmic arcs. Maple Hollow glowed under streetlights, an expensive ghost town with perfect drainage. At 11:17, movement. Finch, crossing his own lawn with a shovel slung casually over one shoulder, headlamp haloing mist. Not hiding, just tending. He stopped at the bed where the cadaver dog had first sat, crouched, adjusted the soil line. His humming carried faintly through the glass, a low, tuneless loop of 4 notes. Bennett let him finish before stepping out. "Bit late for pruning," he said. Finch froze, then turned the lamp toward him. "I couldn't sleep. Thought I'd check drainage. All this digging, you people compact the soil." Bennett stepped closer until the lamp's glare hit his coat. "You'll compact more than soil before this is done." Finch's face was unreadable. "You suppose I want to ask why?" "I already know why." "Oh?" "You buried your first one by accident, and the earth kept your secret. The next year, you tried again to see if it would keep another, and it did. Now you think the ground owes you silence." Finch's gaze drifted toward the freshly tarped beds. "People think gardens are for growing. They forget they're also for returning." "That's poetic. But corpses aren't compost." Finch smiled faintly. "Everything is, eventually." Rain ticked on the shovel blade like a clock. Bennett said quietly, "You know what the dogs will find next." Finch didn't deny it. "The head. You'll get your picture complete. You'll print it in your files. And then what? The world forgets, just as it forgot the first one. At least here, they feed something." Bennett studied him for a long beat. "You think feeding lilies makes murder noble?" "I think it makes it orderly." He turned, started back toward the house. The porch light flared automatically. His shadow rose long behind him across the lawn, stretching toward Bennett like a dark root. The next morning, officers unearthed the final piece, a burlap-wrapped skull under Finch's hydrangeas, 6 inches beneath the mulch. Inside the wrapping, soil had been sifted fine enough to look deliberate, almost artful. O'Leary stood over the find, shaking his head. He was gardening over this last week. Bennett crouched, touching the rim of burlap. He's been gardening over people for 10 years. He looked up toward Finch's porch. The man stood in cuffs now, lips moving silently. No smirk, no fury, just a man calculating lines that no longer aligned. As they led him past, Finch paused beside Bennett. "You should see what grows there come spring." Bennett didn't answer. Some things shouldn't be dignified with curiosity. He turned away, watching the first frost fall as police lights pulsed across the street, red and blue reflections trembling in every puddle. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. The Caretaker's Journal. For 3 days, the evidence unit cataloged Harold Finch's life in boxes. Hand-labeled jars of soil, landscaping invoices,
Photographs of gardens lined up like crime scenes wearing makeup. Every object seemed to hum with order. Bennett spent the first morning in the evidence bay, walking the shelves like a curator forced to admire a lunatic's collection. The tech beside him held up a notebook sealed in plastic. Ledger, but weird, half Latin, half English. Bennett took it. The handwriting was meticulous, tilted right, the same pen used throughout. Each page had 2 columns, plant species and location. Beneath each plant name, Acer rubrum, Rosa alba, Caria cordiformis, was a note in shorthand. The dates ran backward 10 years. He flipped halfway. Caria cordiformis, 2018, alignment north, gift returned. Translate? The tech asked. Latin names, Bennett said. Hickory, maple, rose. But look at the initials after each. VH, MT, DM. Initials of what? People. He paged forward to the latest entry. DM planted October 28, divided sections. Dan Mercer. He closed the book gently. This isn't a ledger. It's a burial register disguised as horticulture. Later that day, O'Leary met him in the interrogation room. Finch sat on the far side of the glass, wrists cuffed, posture perfect. No lawyer yet. He'd waived counsel for the sake of efficiency. He's talking, sort of. Keeps quoting scripture and botany manuals. Says he'll only explain to you. Why me? Bennett asked. Maybe he likes your vocabulary. Bennett entered quietly and sat. Finch smiled, almost relieved. You read my notes, then? Yes. Did you notice the Latin consistency? People think naming is power, but order is stronger. A plant has one true name, one place it thrives. People, too, if you listen. You buried them according to taxonomy? Bennett asked. Finch laughed softly. No, according to temperament. You croon roses differently than oak. Some require separation. Dan Mercer required separation. He was loud, Finch said simply. He ruined the quiet. He came back drunk the next day and kicked over my pumpkins. I told him to stop. He didn't. So you killed him. I relocated him. The soil needed balance. Bennett leaned forward. And the others? The first one, 10 years ago, you relocated him too? Finch's eyes brightened, as if at a fond memory. He was the seed. Do you know what happens when blood mixes with peat? It deepens color, holds moisture longer. It's alchemy. You plant, and the ground remembers. The next year, the blooms came thicker than ever. I thought, perhaps the earth approved. You mistook biology for forgiveness. Forgiveness. Finch looked almost hurt. No, permission. Silence filled the room, heavy as mulch. Bennett watched the man's breathing, steady, calm, measured. No remorse, no gloating, just a craftsman explaining his method. You started keeping pieces, Bennett said. Freezer bags, vacuum seals. Why? Practicality, Finch replied. The city collects yard waste the first week of November. I needed to pace myself. You mean you kept parts to dispose of next Halloween? Finch nodded once. It's efficient and poetic. You all celebrate ghosts. I simply gave them bodies. Bennett stared at him for a long time. You realize you were found because your freezer failed. Finch chuckled. Entropy. Even order erodes. Outside the room, O'Leary rubbed his temples. Man's a poet of madness. Poets are messier, Bennett said. He's an accountant. He thinks the world owes him balance sheets.
The DA wants to charge multiple counts of homicide. Some of these dates in his book were matching to missing persons going back a decade. Think we'll find them all? Maybe, but there's something worse in that shed we haven't found yet. What's that? His satisfaction.
Later that night, Bennett returned to the Crescent one last time. The police barriers were gone, leaving only damp rectangles of soil and the faint mineral smell of decay. One single porch still burned light. Number 8, Finch's house, now sealed with tape. He walked the north line again, tracing the invisible symmetry that had governed every grave. Beneath the still air, he could almost hear Finch's hum, a tune that didn't end, only looped back on itself. Near the curb, he noticed something half-buried, overlooked by cleanup crews. A small wooden stake, hand-carved with the words, "Rest in peace." He turned it over. On the back, in neat pen strokes, was a single initial, H. He left it there. Order would reclaim it soon enough. End of Chapter 5.
Chapter 6. What the Earth Remembers. The first frost came early that year. Maple Hollow shimmered under it, lawns pale as bone dust, flower beds hardened into silence. The neighbors avoided eye contact when they passed each other, as if small talk might wake what still lay beneath the soil. Bennett returned for the final excavation, a courtesy visit, technically. Officially, the case was solved. Unofficially, he didn't believe in clean endings. The department's forensic team had opened 6 more sections of Finch's property since his arrest. Every one held traces, minute bone fragments, a tooth, a lock of hair sealed in earth like sedimentary layers of guilt. He arrived early, coffee steaming in the cold air, and found O'Leary leaning on a shovel handle by the curb. "Morning," the sergeant said. "You'd think this street was cursed. Kids won't even walk here for Halloween next year." "Maybe they shouldn't," Bennett replied. "The decorations were too realistic." O'Leary gave a low whistle. "You ever get used to this part?" "No. That's how I know I should keep doing it." The dig was slow and careful. Ground-penetrating radar had mapped one final anomaly behind Finch's shed, a deeper pocket the size of a small crate. The soil there was rich, almost black, laced with eggshells and shredded burlap. The tech brushed gently until wood grain emerged. The crate had been sealed with rusted screws and labeled in black marker, "Archive." O'Leary frowned. "You ever see a murderer label his evidence archive before?" Bennett crouched beside it. He wasn't hiding it. He was documenting it. They opened it together. Inside were dozens of laminated photographs, before and after shots of gardens. Each image bore a typed date and plant species. Rosa rubra, planted 2017. Acer saccharum, 2019. On the back of every photograph was a single word in ink: returned. Beneath the stack lay another ledger, thinner than the first. Pages of measurements: soil depth, bloom height, decomposition rate. Finch had been experimenting, noting which nutrients produced better growth. Murder as data set. O'Leary swore under his breath. He was doing trials. Bennett said nothing. He turned to the last page where a neat column listed initials. Some matched known victims, others were unfamiliar. At the bottom, a final entry stood alone, marked in red: HF, pending. "Planning his own burial?" O'Leary asked. "Maybe," Bennett said. "Or someone else's." That night, Bennett reviewed everything again at his office.
The clock ticked softly beside his desk. Rain brushed the window like sand. He'd spent years chasing killers who hid from what they were. Finch was different. He'd accepted it, even admired his own design. Bennett spread the soil analysis charts across the desk. Phosphate ratios, trace collagen readings, pH balances. The line of numbers reminded him of something he couldn't place at first. Then it clicked. The intervals between burials. Always 10 to 12 months apart. Never random. A rhythm. Seasonal and deliberate. Finch had followed the agricultural calendar, the natural cycle of decay and renewal. Each October, after harvest, he made his return to the soil. He flipped through photographs of the original sites. The alignment still held true north, each grave exactly 12 feet apart. Finch hadn't been hiding victims. He'd been composing them. Bennett leaned back, the chair creaking. Order was seductive. He understood that. There were nights he too arranged his case files by color, just to feel control over chaos. Maybe that was what bothered him most about Finch. Not the madness, but the reflection of his own compulsion, stripped of empathy. The next morning, a courier arrived with a box from the evidence vault. Inside were Finch's personal effects, gloves, pruning shears, and the compass used to align the graves. The needle was still true. Underneath, a folded note addressed to Bennett Crowe. It had been cleared by the forensic unit. No hidden blades, no toxins, just caper, perfectly squared. Bennett unfolded it. Mr. Crowe, you were right. The earth never forgets. It only waits to be turned again. Take care not to dig too deep in your own garden. H.F. There was no postmark, no evidence Finch had mailed it before his arrest, meaning he must have written it expecting Bennett to find it. He stared at the words a long time, then refolded the note, slid it into an evidence sleeve, and wrote in small print across the label, "Kept for reference." Outside, the frost glittered like glass shards across the pavement. The street crews had already reseeded the lawns of Maple Hollow. By spring, new grass would grow, roots threading quietly through everything that came before. Bennett knew most people would forget, but the ground would remember. And so would he. Chapter 7. The Shape of Silence. Winter flattened Maple Hollow. The snow came early, sealing the lawns under a pale lid that made everything look peaceful again. You could almost forget the graves below. Almost. Bennett didn't believe in forgetting. He returned anyway, under the pretense of assisting with property clearance. The houses Finch had tended were now rental listings, their yards scrubbed of ornament. Only the north line remained, a faint ridge running beneath the snow like a heartbeat still pulsing under the skin of the street. He parked 2 houses down and watched. The wind whispered through empty gardens, dry and metallic. He wasn't sure what he was waiting for. Closure was a word for other people. When the new residents of number 10 arrived, a young couple, cheerful and unscarred by headlines, they waved at him politely. "You with the realtors?" the man asked. "Consultant. I work the investigation." The woman's smile faltered. "Oh, that investigation. Any strange noises since you moved in?" She laughed uneasily. "Just the heating. Pipes settle funny at night." He nodded. "That's normal." But when he turned back toward the lawn, he noticed a new stake already in place near the porch, a small sign that read,
freshly sown, keep off. He didn't like coincidences. Back at the precinct, O'Leary was knee-deep in paperwork. "You know you don't work here, right?" he said without looking up as Bennett walked in. "Occupational denial," Bennett said, dropping a file on the desk. "We missed something." Finch confessed to 8 murders. What's left? The 9th entry, the red one in his ledger. HF. Pending. We assumed it meant himself. O'Leary leaned back. "You think there's another victim? Or someone he planned to replace?" Finch didn't see death as punishment. It was ritual, succession. "You're telling me our killer had an apprentice?" "Maybe not consciously, but obsession draws echoes." O'Leary frowned. "You sound like him." "I'm just listening to the pattern." Bennett spent that night combing through Finch's old community board posts. The man had moderated a gardening forum, pages of polite advice on pruning, soil pH, and compost ratios. Most comments were banal until Bennett noticed a user who replied to every post within minutes: "Green caretaker." Same phrasing, same precision. The account stayed active weeks after Finch's arrest. Bennett sent a trace request. The IP belonged to a new subscriber on Maple Hollow Crescent, number 10. He stared at the address, the cheerful couple, the freshly sown sign. He called O'Leary. "You still at your desk?" "Unfortunately." "Send a unit to number 10 Maple Hollow, quietly." "What am I telling them to look for?" "Anything that smells like wet iron."
They reached the house before dawn. Snow fell soft and steady, muting every sound. The couple met them at the door, sleepy and confused. The woman clutched a robe around her. The man blinked into the porch light. "What's going on?" he asked. Bennett pointed toward the garden. "You didn't dig that new bed yourself." The man hesitated. "No, it was there when we bought the place. We just planted over it." "With what?" "Winter pansies. Soil was so rich I didn't even need fertilizer." O'Leary motioned for the cadaver dog. The animal sniffed, once, twice, then laid down in the snow, tail still. The woman whispered, "What does that mean?" Bennett's breath clouded in front of him. "It means your landlord left you more than good soil." They dug in silence. 6 inches down, the spade struck wood. The same kind of crate as before. Same screws, same label. Archive. Inside wasn't a body, just a collection of objects. A compass, a pruning knife, a pair of gloves too small for Finch's hands. The initials inside the wrist seams read LF. "Who's LF?" O'Leary said. Bennett stared at the gloves. "His wife, Lydia Finch. She died 15 years ago, supposedly of a stroke." "She wasn't one of his listed victims." "No, he listed her as soil origin." The crate contained no remains, only a note, sealed in plastic, written in the same tight handwriting as Finch's journals. "The garden must continue. Seeds don't choose where they're planted." O'Leary exhaled. "So the new owners are just gardeners, for now." He looked out across the row of snow-covered lawns where faint bumps marked the old burial sites and realized the rhythm hadn't stopped. Finch knew someone would move in. He'd left them the tools, the instructions, the soil prepared for new roots. By noon, the property was sealed again. The couple moved out that same day, leaving pansies frozen mid-bloom. Reporters would call it superstition. Bennett knew better. That night, he walked the street one last time. The frost glittered under the moon. perfect lines tracing the north axis where no one else could see them. He paused by the last house and pressed a gloved hand to the frozen earth. The cold bled through the fabric. Some silences, he thought, don't end. They just change caretakers. Then he turned away, boots crunching softly against the snow, leaving the gardens to their quiet sleep.
And there was something else. Chapter 8. The Return to Maple Hollow. Spring came with an indecent brightness, as if the world had decided the only way to bury winter was under color. Tulips flared where the police had dug, daffodils lined the curbs like unrepentant spectators. To anyone else, Maple Hollow looked healed. To Bennett, it looked anesthetized. He hadn't planned to come back. He told himself he was only in the area for another consult, yet somehow his car ended up at the old cul-de-sac again, parked beneath the same maple whose roots had hidden so much. Number 10 had a new family now. 2 kids, a Labrador, laughter audible through open windows. There were toys in the yard, a barbecue on the porch. No ghosts visible, at least not to them. But the soil had memory. Bennett stepped out, his limp more noticeable on uneven pavement. The air carried a faint sweetness of fertilizer and thawing grass. He crouched near the edge of the lawn, where last year's frost had left a ridge. A few disturbed worms curled sluggishly under his shadow. "Beautiful day for it," said a voice behind him. He turned. It was Tara Nguyen, the neighbor who had once called Finch the caretaker. She looked thinner, more watchful now. "I didn't expect to see you again," she said. "They said the case was closed." "It is. Cases close, patterns don't." She nodded toward the house. "New owners are lovely. I try not to tell them what happened. You think it matters? The ground, I mean?" "It matters to those who can hear it." Tara hesitated. "Something strange this week. They said their dog dug up pieces of old burlap by the hydrangeas, thought it was trash from the renovation. I told them not to touch it." Bennett exhaled. "You did right." An hour later, O'Leary met him there, hands on hips. "You realize we can't keep reopening the same street every time a dog finds garbage." "This isn't garbage," Bennett said. He knelt by the flower bed Tara mentioned. The soil was looser than it should have been. Beneath the mulch, he found fine white powder. He rubbed it between his fingers, chalky, light, unmistakable. "Bone meal," O'Leary said. "Fresh. Finch's blend. Someone's been tending the beds." "Who?" "He's been locked up since November. That's the problem. His gardens still behave like he's out here."
The new homeowner stood on the porch as police cordoned the yard, confused, embarrassed, apologetic. Bennett asked if anyone had been in their backyard recently. The husband shook his head. "Just the landscapers the realtor hired before we moved in. Some older guy. Quiet. Wore gloves. Said he was checking soil composition." "Did he leave a card?" "Just a receipt from the HOA maintenance account." O'Leary's eyes met Bennett's. "That account's frozen." They followed the paper trail to a P.O. box registered months after Finch's arrest, under the name Lydia H. Finch. "His wife's name," O'Leary said. "She's dead," Bennett reminded him. "Yeah, but somebody's cashing checks." 2 days later, security footage from a nearby nursery showed a man matching Finch's build. Same posture, same careful movements, buying seed trays and soil bags. When the clerk described him, Bennett felt the familiar chill. Soft-spoken, polite, hands clean. The man had given his name as Henry Fuller, initials H.F. "He's dead," O'Leary muttered. "We saw the body." Bennett's gaze stayed on the grainy image. "We saw a body." Finch designed replacements. He could have trained someone to continue, someone who admired his order. There's always another caretaker. Don't start ghost stories, Crowe. They're not ghosts, they're habits. That night, Bennett drove to the storage facility holding Finch's impounded tools. The manager met him at the gate, yawning. "Most of it's going to evidence destruction next week," he said. "I just need one item," Bennett told him. He found it where he knew it would be, the compass Finch had used to align his graves. The glass face was cracked, the needle still unwaveringly north. On the underside, etched into the brass, were words Bennett hadn't noticed before. "To keep the world straight, follow the line." He stood for a long time, the hum of the lights overhead, steady and indifferent. Finch's handwriting, his wife's initials, the re-emergence of the soil, it all pointed the same way. The north line wasn't just habit, it was instruction, a message for whoever came next. Bennett locked the compass back in its case and handed it to the clerk. "Hold this under my name," he said. "Indefinitely." The man frowned, expecting it to come in handy again. Let's hope not. Before leaving, Bennett drove past Maple Hollow one last time. The police had finished by then, the yard reseeded once more. The street lamps hummed quietly, casting long, straight shadows that fell perfectly north. From his car window, he saw the new homeowners closing their curtains, unaware that beneath their clean lawns, the earth still whispered with careful design. He wondered if they'd ever noticed the way their tulips bloomed in perfect alignment come spring. End of Chapter 8.
Chapter 9. The Line Never Breaks. By early May, the case file had found its place in Bennett's office, center shelf, second row, between the Whitmore disappearance and Exit 29. He tried not to look at it. It wasn't that he feared what it contained, but what it might still become. He'd told himself he was done with Finch, done with Maple Hollow. And yet the call came anyway. "Crowe," O'Leary's voice crackled through the phone. "You're going to love this. A landscaper in Milton just turned himself in. Says he found something in a soil shipment from a supplier registered to Finch's company, the one dissolved 10 years ago. Bennett straightened in his chair. "What kind of something?" "A hand trowel, polished clean, handle engraved with the same Latin species names as Finch's journals, and a note taped under the grip, your name on it." Bennett's pulse didn't quicken. It never did anymore. "Read it." O'Leary hesitated. "You sure?" "I wouldn't have asked." The sergeant sighed. "It says, 'The north line continues. The next garden is already sown.'" 2 hours later, Bennett stood at the Milton property. A half-acre field, rows of fresh sod, fertilizer bags stacked neatly beside a small irrigation shed. The landscaper, young, pale, still trembling, pointed toward the back edge. "I was laying drip lines," he said. "Saw the handle sticking out, thought it was junk until I saw the name." The note was laminated against moisture, sealed with the same kind of tape Finch had favored. The handwriting was perfect. Not a post copy, not aged paper, fresh ink. "Could be a hoax," O'Leary said beside him. "Hoaxes don't use the right soil," Bennett replied. He crouched, scooped a handful from the nearest trench and smelled it. Bone meal, perlite, eggshell, Finch's exact formula. "How?" O'Leary muttered. "He's locked away for life." Bennett looked across the property. Young trees in precise, unnatural alignment, each tagged with Latin names. Caria cardiformis. Rosa rubra. The pattern was the same as Finch's ledger, down to spacing and order.
"He didn't need to escape," Bennett said. "He left a design. Someone's following it. They brought in the property owner for questioning, A man in his 60s, calm, articulate, too polite. His name was Graham Holt, the new contractor overseeing several housing developments. When shown Finch's photograph, he nodded, almost fondly. Yes, Harold. I knew him. Worked together at the Parks Department years ago. Brilliant horticulturist, strange temper. We fell out of touch. Funny coincidence. You start using his soil mix the same week the neighborhood he designed is being resold. He smiled faintly. It's good soil, Sergeant. Recycles beautifully. Bennett watched him closely. The posture was different from Finch's, but the rhythm, the measured cadence, the tidy phrasing, was identical. You visited him in prison, Bennett said. Once, Holt admitted. He wanted advice about publishing his theories. I told him the world wouldn't understand. And you decided to demonstrate them instead. Holt's expression didn't flicker. I only continued his research. Death nourishes life, Mr. Crowe. That's a fact of ecology. Harold simply quantified it. What exactly did you plant here? Nothing illegal, Holt said softly. Yet. By the time they secured a search warrant, the sun had dropped. The first trench yielded burlap again, smaller this time, careful, segmented, not whole bodies, but remains preserved like samples. A forearm, a section of rib cage, fragments of jaw. Enough to make the statement clear. Finch's methodology lived on. O'Leary stared at the uncovered parcels, face pale. This guy's worse. He's industrializing it. Bennett didn't answer. He was looking at the soil line, straight as a compass bearing, running north from the last trench to the far property edge. There, under a newly planted oak, he found the marker, a small wooden stake, hand-carved, reading simply, Rosa C. The back bore a single initial, H. He pocketed it before anyone saw. That night, Bennett sat alone in his apartment, case files spread across the table. Finch's handwriting on the old compass note, Holt's calm explanations, the repeating soil blend, every thread formed the same geometry. The line. The north line wasn't superstition. It was a map. Each site, when plotted, fell along a continuous vector stretching from Maple Hollow through the new Milton Field, running north by northeast, straight toward an undeveloped tract of conservation land outside Georgetown. He traced it with a pencil. The alignment ended in forest, city property, untouched since the 1970s. A place with no cameras, no houses, no witnesses. Next garden, Bennett murmured. At dawn, he drove out. The road ended in gravel and silence. Beyond a rusted gate lay acres of untouched woodland, carpeted in moss and wild garlic. The compass needle in his pocket quivered like something alive. He walked until the path disappeared. Then he saw it, a ring of new saplings in perfect symmetry, each one tagged with small brass plates stamped in Latin. In the center, a patch of fresh-turned earth, smooth and deliberate. He knelt, touched the soil, still warm. Someone had been here last night. Bennett stood, listening to the wind move through the young trees. Somewhere behind him, a twig snapped, not loud, just enough. He turned. Nothing but shadows between trunks. Then a voice, calm, measured, almost amused. "You found the next garden, Mr. Crowe? Harold would be proud." Bennett didn't move. "Graham Holt," he said quietly. The voice drifted closer. "No, not anymore." The sound came from the north. Always the north. End of Chapter 9.
Chapter 10. The Quiet Dig. The forest was soundless, except for the low breath of wind through the saplings. Each tree marked the line, thin trunks gleaming pale in the dawn. Bennett stood in the middle of it, one hand still inside his coat pocket, fingers on the compass. The needle trembled, not from magnetism, but from something alive in the air. "Show yourself," he said. Silence, then a crunch of soil. From between the trees, Graham Holt stepped out. He wore work gloves and a gardener's apron, a spade resting on his shoulder like a pilgrim's staff. Mud streaked his knees. His face was calm, illuminated by the faint gold of morning. "You followed the line perfectly," Holt said. "I wasn't sure you would. I don't like leaving work unfinished." Holt smiled. Neither did Harold. That was his flaw and his gift. "You killed for him." He continued what he began. "Harold taught me that death doesn't end meaning, it releases it." He gestured toward the ring of saplings. "These are his disciples in a sense. Rooted, growing, returning." Bennett's gaze swept the clearing. The earth in the center had been freshly turned, rounded, deliberate, shaped by hands that understood weight and depth. "Who's buried here?" "No one yet. This one's for you." He said it without malice, as though describing a schedule. Bennett's hand tightened around the compass. "You should have stayed in the dark, Holt." "I don't fear the dark," Holt said softly. "It feeds the soil." He lifted the spade and took one measured step closer. "You understand him, don't you? Crowe. The order, the symmetry. You chase it through your cold cases the same way we do. The difference is you pretend it's moral. Order isn't moral. It's survival." "Exactly," Holt whispered, almost pleased. "We're not so different." The spade moved, a swift, horizontal swing. Bennett stepped back, the blade cutting air inches from his chest. His bad leg jarred as he pivoted, pain flashing white behind his eyes. He caught Holt's arm, shoved, sent the man stumbling against the mound. The spade fell, clattering against a root. Holt tried to recover, but Bennett was faster, driving a knee into his ribs, wrenching his shoulder until the joint popped. The gloves slipped in the mud. "You think killing makes you a gardener," Bennett said, breath ragged. "You're just pruning the wrong species." Holt's laugh came broken. "You can't stop it. The soil's already sown." Bennett twisted the arm harder until the words cut off in a gasp. O'Leary's voice echoed distantly, shouting his name, boots pounding over leaves. Bennett hadn't realized backup had arrived. "Crowe! Over here!" Officers emerged through the trees, weapons drawn. Holt didn't fight when they pinned him, but he kept smiling, mud streaking his face like war paint. As they pulled him up, he looked back at Bennett. "North doesn't end, Mr. Crowe. You'll see." By midday, the clearing was a hive of lights and tents. Forensics marked the ring of saplings. Radar mapping showed more anomalies beneath. When one trench was opened, they found a single burlap parcel, small, almost ceremonial. Inside was a compass, identical to Finch's, but with a new engraving. HF leads to GH leads to ? O'Leary held it out. Looks like succession paperwork. Bennett stared at the arrow. The blank space after Holt's initials was intentional, an invitation. He said quietly, "They were making a lineage." "Think there are more?" "There are always more." Later, when the teams packed up, Bennett stayed. The trench was covered again, the soil tamped smooth. He stood over it as dusk bled into the trees. His leg ached, his hands smelled faintly of earth. He thought about Finch in his cell, Holt in custody, and the silence they both shared. The certainty that nature would keep their secrets long after human memory dissolved. He pulled Finch's old compass from his pocket. The needle quivered north, true and tireless. He crushed it into the dirt with his boot until the glass cracked and the needle bent. "End of the line," he muttered. Then he turned back toward the road, where the last of the officers were loading gear. Behind him, the wind moved through the saplings again, a faint whispering sound that could almost have been breath, or the soft, satisfied sigh of earth closing over another secret.
End of Chapter 10. And end of story. Please like and subscribe to support our channel and to listen to more Bennett Crowe Mysteries.